I know it's just the second game of the season for the Kentucky Wildcats, but could Bucknell give Kentucky some matchup problems on Saturday?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Bucknell Bison. Could the Bison end up being a matchup problem for the Wildcats, or more specifically, could one individual player end up causing problems for you? Going to dive into all of that on today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this game, about kind of what we're going to dive into today, I would encourage you, hit the comments at Locked On UK on Twitter is where you can also find me. Okay, Kentucky versus Bucknell. The Wildcats, I want to get out in front of this one. The Wildcats are favored to win this game by a pretty comfortable margin. 85-66 is the final score that KenPom has. KenPom gives Kentucky a 96% chance to win this game. As you all know, KenPom, big analytics site, NCAA tournament committee, uses it to determine seeding, or it's part of the process that they use to determine seeding at the end of the season. This is one of my favorite websites on the planet, so I really like using it whenever going to kind of dive into previews and kind of explaining to you guys what teams are about, not necessarily looking at it and going, okay, so here's this number and here's this number and here's this number, but using the data and watching the team to actually determine how they may stack up against the Cats. So, Bucknell, according to KenPom, is going to lose on Saturday. But there are different things about the Bison that don't necessarily scare me, but do bring attention as we get closer towards this matchup, because Bucknell is not terribly unlike Kentucky in a couple of different ways. First of all, the Bison are incredibly experienced. They're one of the most experienced teams in the country, and certainly one of the most experienced teams in the Patriot League. That's why, despite going 14-19 a season ago, they were projected to finish fourth in the league this season. It's going to be a good team. They have on their roster 10 different upperclassmen, 10, and the majority of them are going to get into the rotation pretty frequently. Every single player in their starting five so far this year has at least 3 years of experience. They've got guys up and down this roster that have been in college basketball for quite some time, and they've not just been in college basketball, as far as I can tell. Out of their entire rotation, every single player that has played so far this season, only one of them has transferred in from a previous school, transferred in from Davidson. Every other player on this team has been at Bucknell, played at Bucknell for several years in a row. That is incredibly impressive, especially considering the fact that they're on a second-year head coach. You would expect a lot of these upperclassmen, these third- and fourth-year guys, to have transferred out and gone elsewhere. Even if they weren't all that great, they could have possibly found playing time in a more stable spot somewhere else. But here in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, a lot of these guys have elected to stay with the Bison, which I think is incredibly impressive. So they're not unlike Kentucky in that aspect, where you're going to go up against a team that has seen a lot of ball. And I think that, yes, Kentucky does have its advantages as far as having, I think, overall a more athletic and a more competent roster, I should say, on top of the experience. But this is something to note. You're not going up against a team that's just kind of a hodgepodge, a team that's thrown together through the transfer portal. We're going to see teams like that through this non-conference slate, but this is not one of them. Bucknell also hasn't relied on the outside shot a ton during these first two games, but they're probably going to do it more as the season progresses, and they're still pretty efficient. And these first two games that they played, are really interesting. So if you go and look at their statistics on KenPom, so far this season, this is a number, if you've been watching the show for quite some time, that I've really put a lot of emphasis on. This will show you what teams look to do offensively and defensively pretty quickly. And this is something that we talked about a ton with Kentucky a season ago as far as their point distribution. According to KenPom, and point distribution is percentage of total points. So if I go out there myself, the University of Dawe, and I score 100 points, if I get 30 of those points from the free throw line, my point distribution in terms of free throws is 30%, right? Because I got 30% of my points from the charity stripe. You look around college basketball, you get to see averages of like what different teams do with point distribution. Bucknell this year, 26.2% through 2 games. 26.2% of their points come from 3. That is in stark contrast to where they were just a season ago. They got 37.5% of their points from beyond the arc. That was almost top 25 nationally. Underneath second-year head coach John Griffin, they like to shoot the 3. Now, they're not the most efficient team, and we'll dive into different matchup stuff here later on down the road, but they're not unlike Kentucky in the fact that they are incredibly experienced and in the fact that they like to shoot 3s through these first 2 games. They've not taken a ton of 3s, but they have been efficient at least in one matchup. Again, already played 2 games. They beat Delaware, and they beat Southern Indiana in overtime. They shot 10 of 19 from beyond the arc against Delaware. That's like a little over 52%. And then from 3 against SIU, they shot 4 of 17, which is really why that game was close. And SIU, I think, is objectively a worse team than Delaware, especially if you go and look at KenPom. I think it reflects that. But they got hot. They got cold. Last year, they were pretty average from 3. I think they shot like 33.8%. I don't have the number pulled up in front of me, but that's the number that I saw earlier, which is like 181st nationally. It's like slightly underneath average. So they're going to shoot 3s. They just may not be incredibly efficient, but they're going to shoot more 3s as the season goes on. That is an interesting style of play for Kentucky, who likes to shoot 3s and is very experienced themselves, to go up against. I think the Cats they did themselves a really solid service by playing a lot of teams like this. This is not the only team Kentucky is going to see this non-con slate where you look up and you say, okay, they play with a decent amount of tempo or not, but they are experienced. They've got some pretty experienced guys on the roster, and they shoot 3s, and some of them do it at a pretty efficient rate. Bucknell is, I think, one of those teams where it's kind of like the starting point, the Walmart brand of those style of teams, if you will. And I'm not trying to crap on Bucknell. In fact, this is a whole episode of talking and previewing and breaking down, like, could this be a matchup issue for the Cats? Because, hey, Bucknell got better. All of these guys that are here again this season, they got better as the season went on last year. They started 6-13, but they finished 8-6 in the Patriot League. That's pretty solid. Pretty solid stuff. So we're going to continue to break this down. Let's talk about the specific matchup issue, the player that I think could be a problem for Kentucky down low. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because they have the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just another job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you are simply looking in the wrong place. And over on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional over on LinkedIn. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, continuing along here on the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. I really appreciate you guys checking out the show. Thank you guys so much for everybody that has tuned in as of late. I'm really excited to get the season going here with you. Kind of a rough start for me for a variety of reasons, but I am so excited to be able to break these games down with you. Kentucky versus Bucknell, Game 2 for for the Kentucky Wildcats. We talked about the interesting things about Bucknell. They shoot threes. They're experienced. They played pretty well towards the end of last season. They got a bunch of guys coming back, a lot of guys that are going to be playing in this game. And all of them have stayed in this program, which is really impressive to me. But there's one player in particular that could be an issue for Kentucky, and that is Bucknell's 7-foot center, Noah Williamson. Noah Williamson, originally from Latvia, he has been in the program for 3 straight years, came here in 2023, and he has progressively gotten better as his time in college basketball has gone on. Why is Noah Williamson a matchup problem? Well, first of all, he's 7 feet tall. He's 7 foot 250. Kentucky has got a couple of players around that height on this roster. Can you match the physicality of Noah Williamson, who is a pretty strong player inside of the paint? And through these first 2 games for the Bison, he's played very, very well. He's averaging 25.5 points, 10.5 rebounds, while shooting 62% from the floor in just 29 minutes of play. He has been somebody that they have relied heavily on so far through these first 2 games. He was not the leading scorer a season ago. That was Jack Forrest, but he is going to be, in my mind, the guy that leads this team this season. Because when you look around, I don't know if you see a ton of incredible scoring threats on the wing or at the guard position for Bucknell. This is essentially their guy, and he could be an issue for UK. He is not just a really solid, efficient scorer. He's also a volume guy, like I just said. I think he's going to be leading the team in points per game this season. They're going to be giving this guy a ton of touches down the stretch. He's a good rebounder. Last year, he averaged over 6.5 rebounds per game. He's a really good defensive rebounder. Not the strongest on the boards on the offensive end, but he does shut things down defensively. And on top of this, he's also a 3-point shooter. He likes to step out from beyond the arc every now and then and take some shots. If you look at last year, actually, we'll take this all the way back to his freshman season. During his freshman year, he did not shoot a 3, didn't shoot a single 3. But last year, he shot 24 of 73. That's good for 32.9%. For a 7-foot, 250-pound man, that's pretty solid. It is respectable, and it's something that you're going to have to pay attention to in this game if you're talking about matchup problems. If you went and watched that Kentucky versus Wright State game, something that I noticed that was a little concerning is Kentucky first of all, defensively, they do not help, at all. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. There are a lot of teams that like to switch. There are a lot of teams that like to help and overcommit, something that Kentucky did way too much. But Kentucky essentially leaves their guys. They will leave you one-on-one and let you solve the problem yourself. And I think that is interesting to see. I think that it is going to work to an extent, but something that it did do is cause problems whenever the ball was being swung around and it left guys open. You weren't seeing guys helping and running over to commit from beyond the arc, so you left a lot of different centers and forwards for Kentucky stranded closer towards the paint when the ball was being kicked out, and they weren't necessarily going to close out on those shots. Wright State had a lot of open three-pointers that they just simply missed, even though Kentucky was able to, on top of the fact that Kentucky wasn't really going to close out a ton with their bigs. Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison weren't stepping out to try and aggressively contest these three-pointers that Wright State was taking. I think you're going to have to respect opponents a little bit more as you get further down the line, because you're going to see teams that can knock down those shots at a higher rate. I don't know if all of that makes sense, but against guys like Noah Williamson, who are really good inside out, you're going to have to be disciplined, right? You're going to have to go out there. I think you're going to have to play him aggressively. He's not the best passer. He does not have a high assist rate at all. So I think that overcommitting and playing him aggressively, if you're Williams, if you're Garrison, will work out for you in the end, but you can't foul. And that's something that we're going to talk about in the final segment, kind of given my prediction for this game, as I think fouls could end up being very important for this team. So Noah Williamson is your big matchup issue. But what is another matchup that I really do have my eye on? Well, it's Kentucky's point guard against Bucknell's point guard. Elvin Edmonds is the Bison's leading point guard. What Lamont Butler does against him defensively is going to be crucial to whether or not the Bison can get stuff going on offense. Elvin Edmonds is essentially the only player on this roster that is going to distribute the ball for them. Their shooting guard, Josh Basco, who's only 6 foot, 180 pounds, he did a decent amount of distribution a season ago, but so far through two games, it has been the Elvin Edmonds show. He's been the one passing the rock around. He averaged almost 4.5 assists last season. He's going to be the guy, I think, in this game that will initiate offense. Now, does Bucknell do a ton of distributing? I'm not quite sure. If you look at this year, they're not distributing the ball very well, but they distributed the ball pretty solidly a season ago. They were top 120 nationally in assists against field goals made last season. So if you are able to, if you're Lamont Butler, kind of shut him down and prevent him from getting guys open looks, I think specifically in the paint and then from beyond the arc if they want to kick it out, just shut him down and make sure that he can't initiate anything. If you can do that, I'm not quite sure where they look to score points, a ton of points, outside of Noah Williamson. This could end up being a UNC Wilmington type of game where the team just essentially has to go out there and knock down tough shots in isolation. I think Kentucky may press them into that defensively. We will have to see what actually unfolds, and I'll give you my official predictions here in just a second. Let's break down some of the final thoughts here on Kentucky versus Bucknell. Before I do it, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Robin Hood Gold. With Robin Hood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1% because Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. You can sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, wrapping up Kentucky basketball's matchup preview with the Bucknell Bison. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Should be an interesting game, at least in my opinion. Kim Palm thinks Kentucky's going to win this game by a considerable margin, but I have my reservations, as we have continued to state here. It's an experienced team that likes to shoot threes with a big that I think could cause some matchup issues if Kentucky plays defense the way they did against Wright State, which, by the way, was not bad at all. Kentucky's continued to rise in defensive adjusted efficiency on KenPom. They're now top 55 nationally after being ranked 72nd, projected 72nd to start the season, which is really, really good to see for the Cats. But here are my final thoughts on Kentucky versus Bucknell. Last year, the Bison did a really bad job at creating turnovers and grabbing defensive rebounds. They also were susceptible on defense to a ton of assists. Teams were able to distribute the ball and get baskets off of passes quickly against their defense last year. They also gave up a lot of three-point shooting. Point distribution goes both ways on KenPom, where offensively, you can be getting 30% of your points at the University of Dawe from the charity stripe, but defensively, you could also be giving up half of your points from three. They gave up a ton of their points from three last season. Are you able to rectify that in this game against Kentucky? Or are you able to do what you did against what Wright State did, rather, which is try and run Kentucky off of the three-point line. If you're able to do that, okay, cool. But now you have to focus on what Kentucky is able to do on the interior, something that BYU did so well a season ago underneath Mark Pope, and they've kind of done underneath his offensive system, is they were able to play efficiently at the rim. They were able to shoot efficiently at the rim. So if you're not able to get a stop beyond the three-point line, can you prevent Kentucky from shooting 60+% from two, which is what they did in the first game this season? They're going to hurt you offensively in one way or another, and so you kind of have to pick your poison. If you're able to not stop assists from beyond the arc, you could end up just losing off of that. But if you're able to push them off the three-point line, I think that's what you would probably try and elect to do if you're Bucknell in this game. They're not the tallest. They're like 206 nationally in average height. So physicality in this game, they're going to have to step it up, despite being smaller and I would argue less athletic than what Kentucky is, although Kentucky not uber athletic. Another interesting statistic here, 16.7 seconds per possession on defense so far this season for Bucknell. That's pretty low. Kentucky likes to play fast. All of this starts to ball up into a major matchup issue for Bucknell defensively, right? They don't play with a ton of pace. They're one of the slowest teams in the nation last year. They're very slow this year on both sides of they're very slow on offense this year. Sped up a little bit, I think, on defense. They don't create turnovers. They don't grab defensive rebounds. They're susceptible from beyond the arc. This all kind of plays into Kentucky's hands, which is why I'm kind of concerned about this game. The numbers say one thing, but watching them and thinking about this says another. Their center, I think, could still be an issue. I think Williamson could be a problem. They're going to have to try and draw fouls, and this is the big thing for me. They're going to have to try and draw fouls and tough this out with some physicality and buckets on the interior. I think that's how Bucknell could win this game. Again, UNC Wilmington style of play where they draw fouls, they get to the free throw line, they execute there, and then they hit some tough mid-range shots and some tough shots at the rim against Kentucky's defense. That's how you win. You're going to have to gut it out. I think that there's a chance they could do that, very much so, but if Kentucky if they're shooting just average from three-point territory, if they're shooting just normal 36, 35%, Kentucky wins this game by 10+. If they don't shoot well, this game could get tight. You also have to think, and this is where I'll leave you, you also have to think about where this team is a few days before playing Duke. Does that affect this game at all? I would like to think it doesn't because of how experienced and veteran this team is. But that is something that you have to note heading into that Duke game, is where is this team at mentally? Are they focusing on that? Are they trying to practice a little bit more for that as they get closer? Or are they focused on this matchup? And how well do they execute against a team that I think could give them problems, despite not, by the numbers, being incredibly great? So let me know what you think in the comments below. I think Kentucky ends up winning, but it could end up getting out of hand. You can leave your thoughts here or at Locked On UK on Twitter. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Whoops, wrong hotkey. Appreciate you guys tuning in today. You can check us out there. You can hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.